In 2022, the Marine Archaeology Unit of the Israel Antiquities Authority announced the discovery of a coin which had been submerged in the seabed off the Carmel coast for 1,850 years. The coin dates to the reign of Antoninus Pius, one of Rome's so-called good emperors, who ruled so effectively and apparently benignly for over 20 years that nobody remembers or talks much about him. His portrait appears on the obverse of the coin and is fairly unremarkable. What caused excitement and a flurry of newspaper articles was what appeared on the reverse side of the coin. On it, what you see is a crab and a crescent moon above it, cradling the bust portrait head of a goddess. The crab is the zodiac sign of Cancer, and the goddess in the lunar crescent is the Roman goddess of the moon. Her name is Luna. The coin excited historians because it's a rare specimen minted in Roman Egypt and part of a series of 13 coins, each depicting a different sign of the zodiac, with an extra 13th coin depicting the full zodiac wheel. For us, of course, the interest is in the goddess depicted on the coin. We can leave the numismatists to their examinations of the physical coin and its history and turn our own attentions to her radiant world of nocturnal luminescence. Apart from vital academic information, there's poetic appeal, isn't there, in the face of an ancient moon goddess rising from the seabed, from the remains of a long-forgotten shipwreck, surfacing from the waves she draws with her gravity, the sea and its tides in the thrall of the moon, returning at last, their goddess, to the light. The moon has always been our companion. People have always gazed up at her, marveling, wondering, dreaming. The firmament of human life has always had its nights crossed with this waxing and waning presence, and in the darkness of the absent sun, the flooding of the sublunary world with this cool light was a gift and a benefaction. In the Greco-Roman world, like ancient cultures the world over, in the absence of both electrical lighting and watches or other such mechanical timekeeping devices, the moon was both a source of illumination and a measure of time, the passing days, months, and lunar years. So with scientific curiosity, the moon was watched keenly, and rational explanations were attempted with varying degrees of success for its movements and cyclically changing appearance. But behind the rock, the reflected light, and the rationalizations, there was, naturally, a deity. And it is to this deity that we turn in this episode to ask, what was the nature of the figure depicted on this ancient coin? What was her domain in the vaults of the heavens? What place did she hold in the religious landscape of the mortals who nightly looked up at her? In short, who was the Roman goddess of the moon? To find out, let us slip from our world of ticking clocks and glaring screens and buzzing lamps into the moonlit ancient night, into the silent liquid gaze of the lunar goddess, and make our offerings at the gentle, gleaming altar of the moon. Let us follow the sparkling celestial path into the realm of Luna. Luna, in Latin, literally means moon, and Luna, with a capital L, is the divine essence of that heavenly body. As a goddess, she comes into human form as a radiant and beautiful youth. She is depicted with her hair and garments luminous and flowing, and her face is serene and emanating, we might imagine, the silvery light of the moon. She's often depicted with a torch, signifying the path she illuminates in the darkness, and on her head you will often find the lunar crescent positioned atop, like a glittering tiara. It's a very ancient image, already wonderfully formulated in the world of Homeric poetry, which describes the heroic Bronze Age of around 1200 BCE. Although it was written down around the 8th century BCE, the written versions that come to us record the oral traditions of long centuries past, and in that world the Greek moon goddess was Selene, in many ways Luna's Greek counterpart. And we find in these early writings, already achingly ancient to the Greeks and Romans of the classical period, some wonderfully resplendent descriptions of the moon goddess. In the Homeric hymn to Selene, for example, the goddess is called upon. Hail, white-armed goddess, bright Selene, mild, bright-tressed queen. And the hymn goes on to describe her emerging from the ocean horizon at moonrise and driving her dazzling chariot across the night sky. It reads, "From her immortal head a radiance is shone from heaven and embraces earth, and great is the beauty that arises from her shining light. The air, unlit before, sparkles with the light of her golden crown, and her beams shine clear. Whensoever bright Selene, having bathed her lovely body in the waters of ocean, and donned her far gleaming raiment, and yoked her strong-necked steeds, drives on her fair-maned horses at full speed. At eventime, in the mid-month, then her great orbit is full, and then her beams shine brightest as she increases. So she is a sure token and a sign to mortal men." It's a very beautiful image, and that idea of her silvery body surfacing out of the ocean at moonrise is exactly the sort of imagery that comes to my mind when thinking about that coin depicting her rising out of the ocean after all those submerged centuries. That glittering lunar luminescence she radiates is also reflected in a local Italian marble, which we call Carrara, but which Romans called lunar. This name, it must be said, derived from a Roman colony in northern Italy which was called Luna, and the wonderful white and glinting marble quarried in the region was therefore called Marmor Lunense, because of the place, not the goddess. But obviously it was evocative of her, and the Greeks likewise called the place the harbour and city of Selene. The geographer Strabo says of the region, "Here are quarries of marble, both white and marked with green, so numerous and large as to furnish tablets and columns of one block, and most of the material for the fine works, both in Rome and the other cities, is furnished from this place." The connection between the glinting moon and the gleaming marble is clear. In the course the moon charted across the sky, Selene, or Luna, was imagined driving a chariot, sometimes pulled by celestial horses, and other times celestial bulls. The crescent moon on the goddess's head was understood to look like horns, and so the goddess herself was sometimes called horned. And this no doubt plugs into much older religious ideas prevalent across the ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern worlds of powerful bull deities lowing in the heavens. Her daytime counterpart was the sun deity, who similarly drove the chariot of the sun daily across the sky. This is Helios in the Greek world and Sol in the Roman, and we'll meet him in another episode. But for now, we'll stay in the domain of the night, where we've already met Trivia, the goddess of the crossroads, who you might recall was also a liminal goddess of darkness, the underworld, and black magic. Trivia was a strange three-headed divinity, and maybe you'll also recall that I mentioned in passing that one of her heads was sometimes identified with Luna. In fact, sometimes all three of her heads were associated with the phases of the moon and her movement across the sky. In the often indistinct lines between deities, the lines between Luna and Trivia can get particularly blurry. But this is understandable as their nocturnal domains overlap, since, as we saw dogs howling at the moon, were thought to be calling out Trivia's true name. Trivia's nocturnal identity was bound up in the moon, just as Luna, like Trivia, also carried a torch to light the path of travellers in the dark. However, Trivia was a chthonic deity, meaning she belonged to the underworld, whereas Luna was a consummately celestial deity whose domain was the night sky. Trivia's three heads, nevertheless, allowed for the overlaps, and some ancient writers even identified one head as Trivia's own, one as Diana, and one as Luna. Diana, being the virgin huntress, was a deity of the earthly realm, who also had a close affinity with the moon. Thus, in that reckoning, Trivia bore a lunar head for the underworld, for the earthly world, and for the heavens above, just as the three faces turning in different directions seem to echo the different phases of the moon. And as I've said before, it's best not to be too rigid or formulaic with these identifications, as they were fluid and changeable in ancient times, and opinions also differed. Through those associations with Trivia, however, we do see Luna drawn out of this world of pure celestial serenity into the murkier worlds of night. Given her monthly, cyclical nature, Luna was naturally resonant with women. The feminine divine she represented pulled the tides as mysteriously as she orchestrated female cycles, and it was a common ancient belief that the watery human body and the brain was as susceptible to the pull of the full moon as was the ocean. Indeed, the English word lunacy is derived from the Latin word lunaticus, also the origin of our word lunatic, which originally meant epilepsy and madness, which were both believed to be brought on under the influence of the moon. So even in her most tangible real-world effects, Luna had immense and far-reaching powers. It was a short step from women and lunacy to witchcraft, and the moon played a central role in various ancient ideas about what witches might get up to under it and through it. Most notably, witches were thought to know how to perform the terrible magic trick known as drawing down the moon, a magic spell that would literally pull the moon out of the sky and plunge the night into darkness. New moons, that is, when the moon was not visibly in the sky, were often thought to be the work of witches, and it was witches from Thessaly in northern Greece that were especially renowned and feared for this trick. Thus Seneca, in his play Phaedra, at one point has a character beseech Luna. When thou drivest thy chariot through the nightly skies, may no witcheries of Thessaly prevail to drag thee down. And it's this trick Ovid is talking about in his Metamorphoses when he describes the infamous witch Circe up to her nefarious antics. Circe turned to prayers and incantations and unknown chants to worship unknown gods, chants which she used to eclipse Luna's pale face and veil her father's orb, he means the sun, in thirsty clouds. Elsewhere, he describes that arch-witch Medea, also embroiled in this dark, moonlit and unhinged world of magic. He writes, 3 nights remained before Luna's bright horns would meet and form her orb. Then, when she shone in fullest radiance and with form complete, gazed down on the sleeping lands below, Medea, barefoot, her long robe unfastened, her hair upon her shoulders falling loose, went forth alone upon her roaming way in the deep stillness of the midnight hour to make her magics. And I like how he describes the horns of the crescent moon on Luna's head waxing to the point where they touch and form the full circle, the full orb, the disk of the full moon upon her head. It's a clear vision of the goddess herself in flux and not a static image. The crescent horns are not, in that light, simply an artistic trope, an attribute or a symbol, but the living moon itself, which she embodies, moving through its phases. And while witchcraft and magic was part of her connotations, she was so much more. Something very lovely about her was the belief that she was the cause of the gathering dewdrops at night. In particular, the full moon was thought to precipitate the heaviest dew, which some, like Pliny the Elder, believed also built up in people's heads, thus causing lunacy. But it was otherwise generally thought to be a sweet and fructifying liquid. Cicero alludes to it among her multifarious influences that bring things to fruition. In his words, Luna's course also has a sort of winter and summer solstice, and she emits many streams of influence which supply animal creatures with nourishment and stimulate their growth, and which cause plants to flourish and attain maturity. And who can resist quoting a fragment of Sappho on this point? In the words of the great Greek poetess herself, sometimes at sunset, the rosy-fingered moon surpasses all the stars, and her light spreads alike over the salt sea and the flowery fields. The dew is shed in beauty, and roses bloom, and tender chervil, and flowery sweet clover. In Sappho's vision, then, all nature flourishes under the light of the moon, and her sweet dew drifts a delicate floral fragrance across the night. Given these connotations, alongside the recognized monthly cycles of the moon and its natural feminine resonance, Luna was also associated with childbirth. Cicero describes the rationale somewhat more prosaically. Luna is invoked to assist at the birth of children because the period of gestation is either occasionally 7 or more usually 9 lunar revolutions. And these are called menses, that's Latin for months, because they cover measured mensa, that's spaces or maybe blocks of time. So her dominion over months and monthly cycles meted out the very rhythms of ancient life. Luna rules the months, as Ovid states. The original Roman calendar, like the Greek one, is often thought to have been a lunar calendar, with each month starting on the new moon. But since agricultural alignment was paramount, it was probably observational also, taking into account the seasons and the stars to remain in sync with nature. However, within any given month, The days were organized according to the moon, in that the calendar month, starting with the new moon, was marked and divided by 3 pivotal days. The calends, the first day of each month and the origin of our word calendar, the nones, which was the 7th day of full months or the 5th day of hollow ones, and I get lost in the details of how to calculate these, but it doesn't matter. The main point is that the nones falls 8 days before the next pivotal day, which is the Ides, famously a fated day for Julius Caesar in March of 44 BCE. The Ides were either the 15th or the 13th day of the month, depending on whether the month was full or hollow. But without getting bogged down in the terminology and complicated calculations, what's important is that these days were all originally calculated by the phases of the moon. So the calends, the first day of the month, was declared upon the first sighting of the moon's returning crescent after its disappearance on the new moon. The nones were the day of the first quarter moon, and the Ides occurred on the day of the full moon. Roman life was generally marked and organized around counting up to these days. So days didn't have a fixed numerical identity as they do now. Instead of saying, I'll see you on the 14th of any given month, for example, you'd say, I'll see you one day before the Ides, or 2 days before the Ides, or 5 days before the calends, or whatever it was. In addition to timekeeping, her changing aspects were also observed for weather-wising, a skill of forecasting the weather from nature signs that's widespread among agriculturalists everywhere. Virgil gives us a poetic description of what weather might be expected, depending on the mood of the moon. As soon as the moon gathers her returning fires, if she encloses a dark mist within dim horns, a heavy rain is awaiting farmers and seamen. But if over her face she spreads a maiden blush, there will be wind. As wind rises, golden Phoebe ever blushes. But if at her fourth rising, for that is our surest guide, she passes through the sky clear and with undimmed horns, then all that day, and the days born of it, to the month's end, shall be free from rain and wind, and sailors safe in port. It's strange then, given her prominence not only in the night sky but in the rhythms and conditions of human life, that despite her conspicuous and celebrated and carefully monitored presence, little is known about the practicalities of her worship. We know from Ovid's Fasti that she had a feast day on what we call March 31st. Luna closes this month's time with her worship on the Aventine Hill, he tells us. And we know that indeed Luna had a temple on the Aventine Hill because in 182 BCE its doors were blown right off its posts in a prodigious storm, and they slammed into the back of the temple of Ceres. Luna's Aventine temple was also struck by lightning in early 84 BCE, and it's assumed that it was swallowed up and destroyed by the Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE. The Roman historian Tacitus claims the temple had stood there since the time of Rome's legendary kings, and that it was built by Servius Tullius, who was Rome's 6th king. But that is really all we know about the temple, and about the cult and worship and what went on there, we know little else. I wonder, witches aside, whether this is because she was attended more by women, who left us little to no written historical records, or perhaps it was just that she was so much an unremarkable, routine and intrinsic part of everyday life that no one thought to say much about her and she escaped the jaws of history. a bit like the quote-unquote good emperor Antoninus Pius mentioned in the introduction, whose reign apparently went by so calmly and so well, very little was said about it. But we do have these wonderful images of Luna, however, and one of my favourites is another pulled out of the sea in another shipwreck off the coast of modern Israel by the ancient Roman harbour city of Caesarea. This spectacular bronze figurine can be roughly dated to the late empire by a hoard of coins that also sunk with the ship. These are of the rival emperors Constantine and Licinius, and therefore date the wreck to the early 4th century. These two emperors co-issued the Edict of Milan in 313 CE, demanding religious tolerance. This included tolerance of Christianity, the religion which would soon eclipse Luna and all her divine cohort forever. So this statue, emerging from the sea like a moonrise from the old world, also offers a poetic last gasp of the ancient heavens on the cusp of a new moon. And maybe I'm waxing romantic here, but that is fitting for Luna, because one thing that I haven't yet mentioned about her is something familiar to lovers and the love-torn, love-lorn, forlorn, sighing romantics across all the ages. She is a goddess who tugs at the heart. The moon, with her distant, delicate, reflected light, provokes longing and nostalgia. In the still of the night, when you gaze at her face, alone or with your beloved, she returns your gaze with her gentle glow, which, even as it bathes you in light, is always somehow elusive and just out of reach. The abiding myth of Luna, or Selene for Greek and Romans alike, was therefore one of impossible and unrequitable love. The moon goddess fell madly in love with a handsome mortal shepherd prince called Endymion. And there are, as always, various versions of the myth, but the end point is always the same. Courtesy of Zeus, Endymion was placed in a cave on Mount Latmus in Caria, which is the coast of modern-day Turkey, and there he entered into a slumber in which he would never age or die, but from which he would never wake up. In some versions, Zeus offered Endymion a choice of destinies, and he chose eternal youth and an unending sleep. But in other versions, this was Zeus's punishment on the mortal for developing romantic inclinations towards his own divine wife, Hera. Still other versions make his fate a request to Zeus from the moon goddess herself, dismayed that while she would cycle across the night skies for all eternity, Endymion and his fleeting mortal beauty would live and die in the flash of a divine eye and be lost to time. In all versions of the myth, preserved in his perfect but forever unresponsive beauty, the moon goddess visited him nightly where he slept in eternity to gaze at his face illuminated by her silvery light. And I think that these sentiments and the hopelessly romantic experience of the moon easily bring Luna closer to us and make her face as recognizable as it's always been. And so I'll leave you with a prayer to Luna from another ill-fated lover from myth, Leander, who is separated from his great paramour by culture, geography, and the dangerous straits of the Hellespont. Nightly, he secretly swims these treacherous waters to be with his love, guided by the light of her lamp, and at dawn every day he swims back. But one night, as he swims across, her lamp is suddenly extinguished, and Leander is left, thrashing in the darkness as the waves drag him down. The Roman poet Ovid imagines Leander's last desperate prayer to Lunar, in which he likens the rocks of the Hellespont upon which he will be dashed to the rocks of Latmus, that cave where Endymion sleeps, and he compares his own imminently tragic love story to that of the moon goddess, gasping that to him his mortal lover is also divine, and that he, a mortal who dared to love her, is about to die. And he begs for the light of the moon to guide him, to save him from death as she once saved Endymion. And at the end he calls her Cynthia, which is just an epithet or a nickname for Luna. Now this may or may not be the kind of prayer uttered in the goddess's temple on Rome's Aventine Hill, but it encapsulates, in essence, the hope and despair of all of us who have ever gazed upon the moon in a dark night of the soul. Here is Leander's prayer to Luna in Ovid's words. Be gracious to me, shining deity, and let the rocks of Latmus rise in thy mind. Endymion would not have you, austere of heart. Bend, oh, I pray, thy face to aid my secret loves. You, a goddess, did glide from the skies and seek a mortal love. Ah, may it be allowed me to say the truth. She I seek is a goddess too. As much as all the stars are less than your bright fires when your silvery gleam goes forth with pure rays, so much more fair is she than all the fair, and if you doubt it, Cynthia, your light is blind. Well, perhaps understandably, the prayer didn't work. Leander drowned, and his lover, devastated, soon hurled herself off the cliffs after him. For while the moon may not be, we all know love is blind.